My son gave the house to his wife's family, even though I had been paying their mortgage. For 5 years, my name is Evelyn Carter, 70 years old. 5 years ago, I thought I was doing the right thing, paying off the mortgage on my son's house, hoping it would become a lasting home for the whole family. I paid with a lifetime of savings, with winters spent whispering to myself to spend less, with quiet nights counting every bill beneath the dim yellow light. But on the day I thought they'd call my name at the family gathering, I realized that house had been given to someone else. No questions, no glance back. Some things, if you don't hold on to them yourself, no one else will. And some sacrifices, if you don't learn to value them, will only echo in silence. If you've ever loved someone with all your heart, only to stand still in the moment they forgot you, then stay a while. This story is for you. 5 years, 60 months, over 1,800 days. I paid that mortgage without missing a single payment. Outside the diner window, the October wind pushed dry yellow leaves down the main street of Ashford. The old diner with its faded plastic booths and a country song playing low on the radio was still where I came every Tuesday morning. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar, a single slice of buttered toast. Same seat by the window, the one I used to share with him years ago. With every sip of coffee, I'd glance out the glass. In my mind, the old house would appear every brick, every step on the porch. I used to believe it would be my final place of rest. But some things can't be held on to, no matter how hard you try. More coffee. Mrs. Carter Marlene's voice, older waitress, stiff hair, sprayed firm soft smile. I nodded, flipped the paper to the back page, where tiny local news stories crowded together in quiet irrelevance. I'll leave the check here for you. Another nod. A few moments later, I reached into my purse, pulled out a few crumpled bills. 20%, no more, no less. I stood up, fastened my coat. The cold wind caught the collar as I pushed through the door. The smell of baked apple pie from the shop next door drifted into the air, and with it, a memory. The first time Frank and I held hands, walking down this very street on an October morning, just like this. The scent of pie in the air, half a lifetime ago. Frank was gone now, just me, and the house. The house. I went back to it, settled into the old porch swing that creaked beneath me, watched as the rose vines clung to the faded wooden walls. The flowers had long since died. Only dry, tangled stems remained, woven together like strands of time that refused to let go. I used to think that house would be the gift I'd leave for Mark, my only son. I thought a home, a patient heart, and silent sacrifice would be enough. Frank died just as Mark was starting college. Those first years were hard. I worked and paid off hospital bills as best I could. When Mark married Chloe, I sold part of the land behind the house to help them with the down payment. When they struggled, I said yes. When they worried about affording their first child, I said yes. When Mark said they'd lose the house without help, I said yes. 5 years ago, I began sending money every month, quietly, like brewing my morning coffee. No one asked. I never demanded. I just thought, when I'm old, at least I'll have somewhere to rest, somewhere peaceful. A familiar car pulled up in front. Mark stepped out. White shirt, worn jeans, that same hurried look he always wore. I stood, straightened. My coat waited. Mom, he smiled gently. Chloe asked me to come talk to you. I nodded. I didn't ask, just waited. We're thinking of making this year's Thanksgiving a bit bigger. Chloe's family's coming, and Well, you know how it is. I nodded again. Mark looked down, avoiding my eyes. She was wondering if maybe you could chip in a little to help make it nice. He hesitated, as if expecting me to say no, but I didn't. I never had. I looked at the rose vines, dry stems, twisted, and nodded no sign of green. Of course, I said. My voice was so soft, I barely recognized it. Mark smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they know the answer before they ask. I knew you'd say yes. Thank you, Mom. Really. He leaned in, kissed my cheek, quick and automatic. When his car pulled away, the dust lifted gently behind it, mixing with the fallen leaves. I stepped back inside. The old savings ledger still sat on the table. I opened it. The numbers were thinning, sparse. I flipped to the last page. My frail finger traced the balance, lower than I remembered, so low. For the first time, I felt uneasy about everything I'd given. It was a strange feeling, like someone had yanked the rug out from under me, and all that was left was cold, bare floor. I closed the book and laid my hand across the worn leather cover. At this age, you start learning truths no one warned you about, that no one owes you anything. And sometimes, what you thought was solid ground was just an illusion. I told myself, just get through Thanksgiving. Maybe things will feel different. But sometimes, hope is just the excuse we use to hold on a little longer. That Thanksgiving, I finally understood some changes. Never walk backward. When I met Mark's in-laws, they smiled, a polite smile, then looked straight through me as if I'd never existed. The house was glowing tonight, warm yellow light through the windows. A Sunday evening, the air crisp, the faint scent of fallen leaves lingering nearby. I stepped inside, adjusted my scarf, and wore the soft, practiced smile I'd grown used to, like a mask I no longer noticed. New velvet sofas, a crystal chandelier overhead, white linen draped across the long dining table. I saw the Hendersons, Chloe's parents sitting upright, hands folded in their laps, gray cashmere sweaters, polished leather shoes. Next to them, a few of Chloe's friends. Polite laughter, glances that passed over me like I was part of the furniture. Evelyn, Chloe walked over. Cheeks, faintly blushed lips, a careful red. Her forest green dress, elegant and understated. She kissed my cheek, cold and dry. So glad you could come. Her tone was gentle, the kind of gentle people learn from etiquette classes. I nodded, stepping farther in. Mark was pouring wine, busying himself, eyes avoiding mine. On the table, bowls of creamy butternut squash soup, weighted steam rising in soft ribbons. I sat down carefully, the old wool dress I wore, feeling lost in the glow of chandeliers, the clinking glasses, the scent of expensive perfume. Mrs. Henderson smiled, teeth perfectly white like piano keys. "We just got back from the Caribbean," she announced, raising her glass. Beautiful sunshine, turquoise, water-cultured people. Nothing like the Midwest. I smiled faintly, one of those smiles that never reaches the eyes, and took my first spoonful. The soup was rich and velvety, unfamiliar. I sipped quietly, partly because I wasn't used to it, partly because no one seemed to notice either way. The conversation moved on to vacations, prestigious schools, winter charities. The Hendersons spoke of their plans to support underprivileged children this season, their eyes glancing over to me as they mentioned those poorer areas in the Midwest. Polite words, but the tilt in her voice felt like a tiny, invisible needle. Chloe laughed and leaned toward me. If it weren't for Mom Evelyn helping with the mortgage those first few years, we wouldn't have managed a house like this. The laughter that followed was light but sharp, like shards of glass. Our great benefactor, Chloe, added half joking, half serious. Mark gave a tight smile, then stared down into his wine. I set down my spoon, hands resting loosely on my lap. The chandelier's warmth didn't reach the chill inside my chest. I looked around the table, delicate appetizers, polished silverware, practiced smiles, and distant eyes, and it hit me. I was no longer the heart of Mark's family. I was just someone they used to know. No longer needed, no longer central. The dinner ended slowly, wrapped in stiff hugs and cool handshakes. I excused myself early, saying I had to be up the next morning. Chloe walked me to the door. Mark stayed behind, busy seeing the Hendersons off. Outside, the wind stung. The streetlights flickered faint and far between. I pulled my scarf tighter and stepped along the brick path. Dry leaves crackled underfoot. On the porch steps, Mrs. Dobbins was waiting, thick sweater hands wrapped around a steaming paper cup. "Heading home, Evelyn?" Her voice was flat steady. I nodded. She held out the cup. "Take this. It's a bit strong, but it'll warm you." I took it. My cold fingers brushed against the gentle heat. We sat together on the bench by the porch, saying nothing, just watching the streetlights stretch into the distance. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. "I used to think," she said, after a while, "that if I gave enough, people would understand." She paused. "Turns out, that's not how it works." I looked at her. The porch light from inside cast a warm glow across our shoulders. Mrs. Dobbins stared straight ahead, her eyes cloudy but strangely bright. "Kids have their own ways," she said. "It's not their fault. Not ours either. It's just, we've got to learn when to hold on and when to let go." I gripped the cup tighter. The warmth seeped through my paper-thin skin, like something I couldn't quite name. For a moment, I remembered my mother and her old saying, "When no one remembers to cherish you, cherish yourself." They asked me to come early to help in the kitchen. But when I arrived, there was no place left for me. Thanksgiving morning. Ashford lay under a soft veil of fog. Along the streets, homes hung pale, golden lights on their porches. At the post office, the flag drifted slowly down the pole, tugged gently by the wind. I drove past it all, wheels pressing into damp layers of fallen leaves, the radio playing old ballads I didn't bother to turn off. Memories stirred those old Thanksgivings. The little house back when Frank was still alive. A kitchen warm with the scent of roast turkey and pumpkin pie. Children's laughter echoing through the rooms. Plates full, chairs squeezed around a wooden table with an extra plank added just to fit us all in. And now, all of it lived only in memory, faint like the breath that fogged the window glass in the early morning chill. Mark's house glowed bright from the driveway. I stepped up to the porch, tugged my scarf close, my arm trembling slightly beneath the thick coat. Chloe opened the door, hair curled neatly, a crisp, white lace apron over a deep red velvet dress. "Oh, you're here. Come in quick. We're all busy getting things ready." Her voice was gentle, as always, but her eyes flicked briefly over my worn wool dress, a flicker of unease she didn't say out loud. Inside the kitchen was already full, the Hendersons, a few of Chloe's friends, even Mark, all bustling about at the sink and counters. I reached for the back of a chair, searching for a way to step in, to belong, but there was no room. The counters were covered in trays and dishes. Cinnamon-scented candles mingled with the rich aroma of the roasting turkey. Chloe handed me a bag of chestnuts. "Could you shell these for me?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't meet mine. I nodded and sat down on a low stool near the kitchen door, the kind of seat no one wanted, the kind no one noticed. My fingers trembled as they cracked open dry shells. Around me, laughter rose and glasses clinked. Talk of vacations, Caribbean cruises, none of it settled near me. It all floated past. The turkey was placed in the center of the long table, white lace cloth dotted with pale yellow chrysanthemums, candlelight flickering inside delicate glasses. I washed my hands, took a plate, and slipped quietly into a seat at the far end. Mark stood, tapped his glass gently, and smiled. The light caught his face. There were fine lines now around his eyes. But in his gaze, I still saw the boy I once held in my arms. "I just want to thank everyone for coming today," he began. "And while we're all together," he paused, looked over at Chloe. She nodded her smile, holding something I couldn't quite read. "We wanted to share some good news. As we begin a new chapter in our little family, we've transferred the ownership of this home to Chloe and her parents." A quiet moment followed. Then applause broke the silence. Scattered, cheerful, congratulatory. I sat there, wine glass in hand, my lips pulled into a smile, strained uneven. The turkey still smelled delicious. The candles still flickered. The glasses clinked in celebration. But I heard none of it. Just a cold, hollow silence wrapping around me, like the morning fog outside. This house, the house I thought would be Mark's, the house I'd quietly paid for month after month, every brick, every inch of that garden tied to memories I'd watered with sacrifice, all of it given away. No conversation, no warning. Chloe laughed lightly, pouring more wine into my glass. "Now, you can finally rest, Mom Evelyn." Laughter again. I laughed too, but as I lifted the glass, my hand trembled. The wine shimmered gold beneath the candlelight. I drank it down. The burn hit the back of my throat, sharp and warm, but it couldn't thaw the cold in my chest. In the corner of the room, the light angled just so, catching my sunken cheek, my thin, brittle fingers curled around the empty glass. I set it down, gently, decisively, my last glass of wine in this house, and with it, I set down everything else I had left. They say the first one to walk away from the familiar is the one who lost. I don't believe that. It was the first morning of December, cold enough to numb the skin. The house was silent, except for the wheezing hum of the old heater. I woke earlier than usual, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and stood by the kitchen window, staring out at a sky pressed low with heavy gray clouds. On the porch, the season's first snowflakes drifted slowly past the glass, small and weightless. I wondered how many winters I'd stood here, waiting for something that was never going to come. Pulling my sweater tighter, I picked up the empty cardboard box and began to pack. Not much. A few faded photographs, some old books, the blue and white porcelain tea set Frank gave me for our anniversary. I wrapped everything carefully in soft towels and placed them inside. The wedding photo on the mantel. I removed it from its frame, folded it gently, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Every object that passed through my hands was a piece of memory. But this time, I didn't let myself get lost in it. My mother used to say, "No one's coming to save you but yourself." When I closed the last box, I exhaled long and quiet. The sound stretched out in the empty kitchen, echoing like a spoon dropped in the dark. That's when I heard the car pull up outside. Through the fogged window, I saw Mark, gray coat hands in his pockets, hesitating. I opened the door. He climbed the steps, eyes lowered. "Mom, you're really leaving?" I nodded, tightening my scarf. He stepped closer. The scent of cheap cologne and cold air mixed in the space between us. "You don't have to do this. We still have room." His voice trailed off, as if he didn't quite believe the words himself. I looked him in the eyes, the same eyes that once welled up when he took his first steps, that once gleamed with pride the day he graduated. Now, they just looked unsure, distant. I breathed in, deep, felt the cold settle into my bones, and replied, steady, quiet, "I've given enough, Mark. This house and all the hope I poured into it, it's time I let it go." Mark pressed his lips together, but said nothing more. I turned, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back to watch him fade from the porch. I locked the door. The metal key chilled my fingers. For the first time, I didn't pause to look at the rose vines on the railing. Didn't glance back at the house from the steps. I simply walked. Ashford's streets were hushed beneath the snow. White blanketed the rooftops. Bare oak trees cast long, thin shadows across the frozen ground. My car started slowly, tires crunching over ice. I stopped by the bank on the corner. The glass windows fogged the old wooden sign hanging low. Inside, the tellers were familiar faces from the diner. They nodded, half surprised, half understanding. A young woman with her hair tied back gave me a small, polite smile as I requested to close the auxiliary account, the one I used to send money to Mark each month. "Mrs. Carter, right, I've seen you at Johnson's Diner." I nodded, eyes on the form. "I remember you used to sit by the window, reading the paper every morning." She smiled again softly. I didn't answer. I signed the papers, gathered my bag, and left. Outside, I ran into Mrs. Dobbins, standing by the fence, holding a warm apple pie, wrapped clumsily in a checkered cloth. "Baked this morning," she said, extending it toward me. I took it. The warmth seeped through the cloth into my cold hands. "Good luck, Evelyn." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Those who've weathered enough storms know the kindest wishes are often the ones left unsaid. I nodded in thanks and moved on. When I returned to the house, I paused, not to look. Not out of regret, but to confirm something to myself. I had done enough. I had loved. I had sacrificed. I had waited. And now I chose to end it. I opened the trunk, placed the box inside. One hand held the pie. The other slid the key into the ignition. The door closed, sealing me off from the cold. I didn't call Mark, didn't message Chloe, didn't tell anyone I was leaving. This quiet departure was the last thing I still owned, the one thing that was mine. I started the engine. The car rolled forward. White snow faded in the rearview mirror. No one stood at the door to wave me off. No lights turned on. No hands reached out. I drove on, didn't look back. The house was no longer home. I wasn't leaving. I was choosing myself. I used to think my life was down to just waiting. Turns out, I still had the right to begin again. The little house sat tucked away at the end of a dirt road on the edge of Ashford. A weathered wooden cottage with a dull gray roof, its front yard bare and blanketed in snow. The windows were tiny, the curtains faded, but the winter sunlight still slipped through, casting faint streaks of light across the patchy wooden floor. I stood at the steps, the new key pinched between two fingers. No red ribbon, no congratulatory applause. Like the first time, Frank and I bought a house. Back then, we were young broke, but believed everything was still ahead of us. That first home was just as small and just as worn as this one, but it smelled of fresh paint and morning sun pouring in through the windows, the kind of light that makes you believe tomorrow might be better. I drew in a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, releasing the scent of damp wood and dust. I didn't flinch, just stepped inside and flipped the light switch, a flickering, dim bulb overhead. I set my bag down on the floor, unwound my scarf. Outside, the wind shook the bare apple tree in the yard, casting long, thin shadows across the snow. Buying a house on my own, no permission, no advice, no waiting, just me. It felt both freeing and terrifying. An emptiness I recognized but couldn't quite name. Like sitting in a dark room, knowing the light is there. If only I'd reach for it. 2 days later, I started fixing things up. Every morning, bundled in thick sweaters and a scarf wound tightly around my neck, I painted the walls, scrubbed the cracks, patched the stains. The wooden ladder wobbled. The smell of fresh paint stung my nose. But every brushstroke felt like a breath of new life. In the afternoons, I worked in the yard. The snow was still thick, but I raked what I could, pulled out brittle weeds. The tree roots barely stirred beneath the cold ground. I didn't know if anything still lived down there, but I knelt anyway, touching each root gently, like I might wake something fragile. That day, as I was planting small, wild daisies along the fence, I heard a sound. I turned to see an old man in a worn baseball cap, leaning on a cane, watching me from across the fence. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "Morning," I replied, standing and brushing dirt from my gloves. "Name's Harold, just 2 houses down. Used to be the gatekeeper at Ashford High." He extended his hand. I shook it, rough, cold, but steady. "Evelyn," I said simply. He looked at me for a moment, then squinted. Trying to save those half-dead trees, I smiled faintly and shook my head. "Just giving it a try." Harold leaned on his cane eyes, scanning the cleared patch of yard. "Not everything needs saving. Sometimes you just gotta give it time to pull itself up." Then he bent down and planted a bamboo stake beside the biggest apple tree. "I used to think I had nothing left to start over with," he said. "Turns out there's always something, if you're willing to look." He turned slowly and walked back home. I watched him go. A lightness stirred in my chest, soft as falling snow. That night, I cooked my first meal in the new kitchen. Something simple: chickpea soup and toasted bread with butter. The stove was old, the flame uneven, but the aroma was warm and sweet. I set the table beside the window, lit a single white candle. Outside, the snow still fell fine and thick, blanketing the backyard. I poured a cup of black tea for myself and settled into the one armchair I'd brought from the old house. Sipping the tea, I leaned back, letting the light from the desk lamp cast soft shadows across the floorboards. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't owe anyone anything. No one waiting for me to take care of them. No one expecting me to sacrifice. No one asking for my yes or my silence. I was free. No strings, no bargains, no promises. I'd lived for others long enough. Now, it was time to live for me. And like a field after winter, my heart would bloom again slowly, but surely. Winter always has to melt, eventually. By March, Ashford had begun to shake off its heavy winter coat. The roads were slick with meltwater, and dull gray lawns started to hint at patches of tender green. This morning, I stood on the porch with a steaming cup of tea, watching the last drops of ice slip from the apple tree and fall onto the weathered wooden steps. The air smelled of damp earth, raw and honest, with a trace of lingering chill. But somewhere in that breeze, I could smell spring, faint, fleeting, but real. Across the street, Mrs. Dobbins was folding a checkered wool blanket over her porch chair. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. I nodded and stepped back inside. This morning was the town's book club meeting. The first time in years, I entered a room full of unfamiliar faces and didn't feel like I didn't belong. The Ashford Library was small, its mint green paint peeling the low windows, fogged with condensation. The reading room was warm, the fireplace crackling with slow-burning logs. I chose a chair, tucked in a corner, where soft sunlight slipped through the thin curtains. Today, we read Little Women, an old story, but it still warmed something inside me. Mrs. Dobbins read aloud, her voice steady and calm. She reached the part where Beth sets the table, her hands trembling with fever, but her eyes quietly full of joy. There are satisfactions that don't need to shout. The meeting ended. I lingered to return the book, listening to the quiet murmur of conversations around me. Snippets of stories, gentle shoulder taps, casual handshakes, things that used to feel distant, now felt almost familiar. On the steps outside the library, I heard a whisper behind me. They say the Carter house is about to be foreclosed. Mark and Chloe both lost their jobs, took out loans for cars and investments. Not much of a house left. I didn't turn around, just pulled my scarf tighter and kept walking. Ashford held its annual Spring Flower Festival. As always, stalls lined the town square, daffodils, tulips, and wild daisies, blooming in chaotic harmony. I received an invitation from Mark. A thin card, his signature rushed the message, polite, with a hint of apology. An invitation to a reconciliation dinner. I folded it in half, didn't tear it, just left it on the table beside the cold teapot. Late afternoon, Mrs. Dobbins knocked on my door. I have 2 tickets to the festival. Want to come? I nodded, grabbed my coat, and stepped out. We walked along the stone path, beneath trees, just beginning to bud. Ashford folks bustled around the stalls, voices light with laughter. The scent of cinnamon pastries and buttered popcorn drifted through the air. I wasn't looking for anyone, wasn't worried about who I might run into. By twilight, we walked back home. Cutting through the alley, I paused in front of my apple yard. The snow had melted in patches, revealing dark, damp earth, and in that cold soil, a few tiny green shoots had begun to emerge, tentative tender. I crouched down, brushing a fingertip against one. Its leaf was paper thin, but its stem clung fiercely to the rough bark of the old tree. I smiled, a real smile, not forced, not sad. I had survived the winter, not just the one outside, but the one inside me. The long, quiet winter that felt like it would never end. And now, looking at those fragile buds, pushing through hardened ground, I knew I had done the same. I didn't need anyone to give me spring. I had planted it myself. Beneath the March sky, where tiny blossoms pushed through the cold ground, I realized something. You don't need anyone to grant you spring. You can sow it yourself. And that is enough. I used to think love meant unconditional sacrifice, quiet endurance. But I've come to understand, if you don't learn to cherish yourself, there will come a time when even those closest to you may turn away, like an old blanket that kept everyone warm through countless winters. When the sun returns, people forget how much they once depended on it. I place a hand over my chest, where the steady rhythm still beats slow but strong, like the old apple tree that somehow made it through the harshest winter of its life. No one needs to give me anything. No one needs to remember. It's enough that I'm still here, steady, quiet, resilient. So if this story reaches you, take a moment, pause, and ask yourself, have you cared for your own heart enough before trying to warm the whole world?